afternoon, everyone. Welcome to LittleAfrica BronxNews' Meet the Candidate interview series. My name is Mona Davids. I am the founder and publisher of LittleAfrica BronxNews. As part of our civic engagement, we are hosting these Meet the Candidate interviews with our citywide candidates, our city council candidates, as well as comptroller and public advocate candidates. 2021 is a big year with this year's municipal elections, which makes 2022 a very exciting time for us to look forward to. And in today's interview, we're very honored to have Comptroller Scott Stringer joining us today for the interview. So Mr. Stringer, for our viewers, most likely very few who do not know you, please introduce yourself.
Well, first, Mona, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk directly to the community. For those who don't know, I'm the New York City Comptroller, which means I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer of the city. And I have a lot of different jobs in that office. The first is I'm the Auditor in Chief, so I look at wasted money in agencies. I look to root out waste so we could redirect the money where it's needed the most in our neighborhoods. I review all the contracts in the city. I run the fourth largest public pension fund in the city. And when you put all together my work as controller, as a former borough president and state legislator, my candidacy for mayor is based on the experience and the skill I have to bring back the economy of New York City post-pandemic. I also grew up in Washington Heights. And when I was growing up in Washington Heights at the tip of Manhattan, we didn't go downtown, we went to the Bronx. And that's where my parents are from. That's where I went to play and to be part of the Bronx experience. So I'm very excited to be here with everybody today.
Wow, thank you. Well, welcome. So, Mr. Stringer, you just in your opening remarks, first thing that you mentioned right now is, recovery, COVID-19. So my question to you, and the question on everyone's mind is, as mayor, what is your strategic plan for our city's recovery? Families are struggling. Many small businesses have closed. Day one, Mayor Scott Stringer, what are your three priorities? Let's just start off with that.
Well, look, the next mayor has to be ready on day one to meet the three crises head on. We have an economic crisis due to COVID. We have a health crisis. And we have a justice crisis. And when you think about the economy before COVID, the unemployment rate in the city was 3.4%. And over the last 10 years, we added 970,000 jobs to the economy. Once COVID came in March, the unemployment rate went from 3.4% to 20%. And in communities of color, it was much higher. When you look at the health disparities, we saw how many impacted communities were felt by the COVID virus. My mom died in April of the virus. She died at a Bronx hospital. And I remember her doctor saying to me that this is a crisis that discriminates. People of color in the Bronx were coming into hospitals dying at the age of 50 and 40. And that's because the government for years has managed people's health crises instead of trying to solve these issues. So when you look at the economy, when you look at the health disparities that communities face, and how we can play a better role in creating one justice system for people, the next mayor is going to have to work on this all at the same time. And I have the vision and the skills and the plan to bring our economy back, to open the economy different than we closed it, which means a larger investment in the communities hit hardest by COVID. Whether it's the African community or different neighborhoods in the Bronx, we've got to make that investment. And as mayor, that's how I'm going to budget. We also have to recognize that we have to start with the recovery with our small businesses. We've already closed or lost 2,800 small businesses, Mona, businesses that employ 50 or less. So we're going to need to create a tax package to offset the losses these businesses have felt. We're going to have to incentivize new businesses to go to vacant commercial corridors. We have millions of square foot, 17 million square feet of vacant retail space. So many whole commercial corridors in the Bronx are closed. We need to adopt my small business plan. We need to help small immigrant businesses with their tech platform. And we've got to get government off the backs of our small businesses to give them breathing room to open back up. Right now, we've lost 520,000 people who were employed in our small businesses. We've got to open up the restaurants, the retail stores. Our diverse businesses are the backbone of this economy. And I'm the mayoral candidate who has a 25-point plan. I know this city. I've worked with the business improvement districts. I've walked the business corridors. I've worked with business owners, and I am ready to fight to bring the economy back, starting front and center with our small businesses.
No, I'm very happy to hear that because one, I am a Bronx small business, and reading that New York Times article not too long ago where it spoke about the fact that only 2% of Bronx small businesses received any funding from the government, from the city and from the federal government, whether it was through the Paycheck Protection Program or other stimulus funding support. And that's really unfortunate because, you know, as we all know, small businesses drive the economy. And on a local basis, it's small businesses that, you know, employ our fellow community members. You know, our neighbors work in our community small businesses. And this has had a devastating effect on our families, not just in the Bronx, but throughout New York City. And continuing on with small businesses, one of the complaints that a lot of small business owners had was that they had no support to fill out the paperwork. There was a lot of paperwork, you know, it was just so much bureaucratic red tape, and there wasn't really anybody or any organization available at that time to help them complete the paperwork, get everything in order so that they could have access to those funds. The mayor, you know, we have the Small Business Administration, New York City Small Business Administration. So my question is, where were they? And considering what's happened, do you have any plans to perhaps restructure the support that's there for small businesses, starting with the Small Business Services Administration that we have?
Look, you really hit it when you talked about what is the state of play right now for small businesses. It really is outrageous that very precious few dollars went to small businesses in the Bronx and neighborhoods around the city. The truth is the Trump stimulus money went to Wall Street, not Main Street. There wasn't PPP available through the banks for the small businesses. But right now, we have hundreds of millions of dollars available in PPP money. I want the Small Business Administration or Small Business Services to take a new proactive approach. We should be banging on the door of every small business to let them know how to apply, when to apply, and to help them through the process, because that PPP money is the difference between staying open and closing. And we have discriminated against businesses from all different ethnic groups, all different immigrant groups who are fighting every day to keep their business open. But let's face it, paperwork is for the privileged. And that is why the bigger businesses were able to navigate the PPP money. They had the lawyers, the accountants, they had the expertise. But so many of our small business owners have language barriers, and they're good at what they do. They know how to make a living. They know how to reinvigorate an economy. But when it comes to this work, the city has an obligation to make sure that everyone has a fair shot to get critical PPP dollars. I've just called on the city administration to double down, to access this money now. We have a new president, we have a new day, but we are not coordinating with our small businesses. In fact, I would argue to you that for too long, we have done everything as a city to close the businesses rather than keep them open. When you look at the agency and the inspections, what do? They come into businesses and only want to close them down, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a retail space. Enough already. We should think about making sure no business closes. And when a business does close, we should ask, why did we let that happen? And we're not doing that right now. We don't care who comes and who goes. But COVID has discriminated in so many of our communities of color. And we need a mayor who's going to say, look, we have to help the backbone. Because when you keep a small business open in the Bronx, you know what's happening? That small business is hiring locally. They're hiring the children. They're making sure that people can make a living. And we're not doing that with our Small Business Administration.
Yeah, no, we definitely need to give more support and services to small business owners. But that, you know, that that's a good way of starting to address this great disparity when it comes to the funds distributed under COVID-19 support. So, Mr. Stringer, I want to now just briefly go into I guess like it's like I call it the black hole, the Department of Education. That's what I call the black hole as a parent. You know, over the years, I have read some of your reports, your audits on the Department of Education. The Department of Education has one of the largest budgets in New York City. It's over $30 billion. And I tell everybody with a B, everybody, a B, $30 billion. But when it comes to the educational outcomes of the students, we have supermajority of students who are not at grade level. Then we have issues when it comes to specialized high schools, gifted and talented. And right now, unfortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic, remote learning has been a complete disaster. With all the money that they have, you know, we have the beginning of the school year, we still had students that didn't have Chromebooks. At the end of last school year, when the schools closed in March, children didn't have Chromebooks. And the ones that did get Chromebooks didn't have internet access, the digital divide. With their $30+ billion budget, you know the exact number. I don't. I know it's over $30 billion. So, Mr. Stringer, as mayor, how are you going to restructure the Department of Education and hold them accountable for, you know, for the money, for the contracts, which you've also objected to contracts, and they just are rammed through. As mayor, how are you going to put a stop to the shenanigans that goes on when it comes to the Department of Education? Frustrated parents here.
So Mona, let me talk to you first as a frustrated parent. I have 2 children in the public school system. You know, I got married a little late in life, so I have a 9-year-old and I have a 7-year-old, a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader. And I'll tell you, remote learning for my wife and I has been a real hardship. It's been a struggle. One of my kids has really had a hard time with this, and we made the decision to put them in the hybrid learning. And you feel sometimes as a failure as a parent because you want to give your child everything that you can. And the truth is that I'm a privileged parent, very privileged, because I have the 2 of us work. And when the computer doesn't work or the remote device doesn't work, you know, I just put down a credit card and buy what my kid needs. And if my kid needs special attention, I can get that child special attention. What discriminates and what gets me furious is very few parents can do that. The notion that a single parent in public housing has $1,000 for a computer or can up their internet access is not a reality. These are parents who love their children. They'll do anything for their kids. In fact, there are parents who have one learning device for 3 kids or barely enough internet. And that is the disaster called the Department of Education. We've got kids in homeless shelters that don't have remote learning. We have kids who are already behind, who are falling behind in our public school system. So as controller, I have audited the Department of Education. I've taken a sledgehammer to that bureaucracy. No one running for mayor has done the audits and investigations in the wasteful spending of DOE. So I know right where to go as mayor. We got to stop layering on the bureaucracy and the personnel of non-teachers. We've got to direct money directly into the classroom. And you know this, after the pandemic, our kids are going to need real mental health services. There are a lot of children who lost their moms and dads. They were frontline workers. They didn't have funerals. There's been no closure. My own 2 children lost their grandmother in a Bronx hospital. They haven't had closure. They still don't truly understand why they don't have their grandmother. So we've got to start now, before the election, in building out a mental health program, to rooting out the waste that I identified in the Department of Education, and fundamentally change the system and help the poorest kids in our communities. There's nothing like a Bronx kid, right? And look, I know that firsthand. And we want to make sure that every kid has an equal opportunity to make it. And as mayor, I'm going to do that. And as a parent, there's nothing more important than building this city for all the children. And that's what I'm going to do.
No, thank you, because I know you know where the waste is and where to make the necessary changes when it comes to the Department of Education. Just continuing on with this, Mr. Stringer, you were a state legislator. So when it comes to specialized high schools, when it comes to the Hecht-Kalendra Act, you understand, you know the background, and I'm sure you hear from parents on both sides, parents who support specialized high schools and parents who oppose specialized high schools and think that, the specialized high school exam should be just completely abolished. But you are aware that there were only 4 schools under the Hecht-Kalendra Act, the 4th one being LaGuardia High School, which is a specialized high school, in addition to Bronx Science, Stuyvesant, and Brooklyn Tech. As Mayor Bloomberg, he created additional specialized high schools, as you know, the other ones in Staten Island, Demon, Queens College. I'm forgetting one. I know I'm missing one. But the point is, he created additional specialized high schools. Hecht-Kalendra only applies to the original 4 passed in the Act in the early 70s. So as a parent, and if you're elected mayor, how are you going to deal with this specialized high school issue? What's your game plan?
Well, look, right off the bat, we're going to have to come to terms with some reality in the city as it relates to high school kids. And let me just say, I'm a graduate of John F. Kennedy High School in the Bronx. And, going to a school that so many diverse kids went to really shaped my life and my thinking about the diversity of New York City. And so many kids in the Bronx went to Kennedy, right? Like so many who I meet to this day. But I have to say, with the specialized high schools, I commend many of our immigrant parents for sacrificing so much to give kids the extra test prep that kids need to be successful in tests. But the problem is that not every parent can do that. And the statistics, the data is very clear. Black and brown children cannot get into these schools because this test is not about classroom learning, it's about test prep learning. And I would trade out the SSAT test. I would replace it with the 7th grade state test, because the state test is about classroom learning, and it will increase Black and brown kids and more diverse kids getting into these specialized schools. Because what we want is fairness and equity. Look, I want kids who can be accelerated to be rewarded for good work, right? There's a place for that. But I also want to make sure long-term that we are creating a school system with equal resources that every kid can learn in. That's what the difference was with John F. Kennedy High School and Bronx Science, right? There was a place for everybody, and we have to be mindful of that. And so I hope that we can repeal Heck Calandra. This is not about being punitive or disrespecting any group. It's about making sure that more kids, not just 5 kids, but more kids can be in these great schools.
Well, you're the first candidate that I've heard talk about using the 7th grade state math test, um, you know, you know, as criteria for these schools. My daughter attended the specialized high school. I have and she graduated. She's 22 now, but I have a 12-year-old that's in the 7th grade. And, you know, his teachers keep telling me, you know, oh, well, you know, 7th grade is really important. Those are the grades that the high schools look at. And now you're saying, 7th grade is going to be even more important, because that 7th grade test may decide whether or not you go into one of those former specialized high schools.
Well, look, statistics show that classroom learning and taking a test based on what you've learned in the classroom, doing your homework, showing up in class, we will have more diverse kids going into the schools. If you have a test that you can only access if you have outside prep for the test, it limits the amount of kids who can have access. And look, you're right about this. We have a handful of a handful of schools that require Albany approval. We have other schools that we should use different methods and different opportunities for children. You know, but at the end of the day, I would say that we also have to build out all of our community high schools, all of our middle schools, and it starts at the youngest age. We have to resource the classrooms. And you mentioned my qualification, because I know where the bodies are buried and the money's buried at the DOE. We got to end this bureaucratic nightmare. You know, a chancellor comes into the system and they bring their team, right, or their crew. And so we get a lot of administrators that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not kidding you, like a lot of non-teaching administrators. Then the chancellor leaves, the mayor appoints another chancellor, but you know what happens? That chancellor brings in all their people. They don't get rid of the previous chancellor's people, they just add to the bureaucracy. Meanwhile, there's so many classrooms that don't have resources, kids who don't have extracurricular activities. What are we doing here? We should hold every dollar as precious to invest in school safety in the age of COVID, programs in schools that don't have resources. And I am so committed to this as a parent, as somebody who knows the importance of streamlining the bureaucracy at the DOE. And look, my mayoral candidacy, it's about day one, not 3 years, 4 years into my term. It's about coming in and fixing this huge budget to make it more credible for kids to learn, kids of all different backgrounds.
Yes, well, you know, we do know where the bodies are buried. So please, we need the money in the classrooms.
Thank you.
I want to move on now to housing. We have this eviction moratorium. So many families in the Bronx and throughout the city have been impacted financially because of the pandemic. And while we do have this eviction moratorium, Mr. Stringer, what's going to happen when it ends in May? Because the rent arrears are still piling up every month. And families who are not, you know, with no income coming in, at the end of May or June, they're still not going to have the money to pay the arrears. So what is your, you know, what would you recommend the current mayor and governor do to help these families? But even next year, As mayor, how would you support these families, because they're still going to be feeling the impact of this?
This is a true crisis. When you'll remember, we voluntarily shut down the economy because of COVID.
Yes.
So people who had those jobs that I talked about, those 900,000 jobs that we lost in 30 days, were people who were innocent victims of a health crisis that they had nothing to do with, an international health crisis. And we had a president in Washington who, I mean, we all know what they did, nothing. So now you have people with no job and no savings, and they cannot be evicted. So the stimulus money that we will get from Washington, we need a bucket of money to make sure that we cancel the rent arrears, and that we also help with mortgages and align the banks to make sure that this money goes to create a pathway for people to re-enter the economy, start paying rent. But it has to be at a time when the jobs are coming back and the economy is being opened. First step is vaccination, inoculation. Once we do that, more people can go back to work, more jobs will be created, and then that stimulus money can be redirected as people go back into the workforce. We've already gotten back a quarter of the jobs we lost going back to February, but it's not enough. We cannot put so many people out into the streets, and we're not going to do that under my mayoralty. We do have to work on a financial aid package that does not disrupt the economy. But this is where financial experience and government experience is going to matter. How do we get this right? Because we've got a lot of folks, they lost their businesses, they lost their careers, and they're barely hanging on with their families, and they are frightened, and they should be. But by the way, let me also mention that's the short-term crisis. The long-term crisis is opening up the economy, and we're going to have to make sure that people who did lose their jobs and have jobs that are not coming back into the economy, we need a new workforce development plan. We're going to have to retrain people in the new jobs. That means certificates in telehealth and IT work that I believe is going to come to the city. I want to make two-year college CUNY tuition free right now to create a program for the certifications and the jobs of tomorrow. You don't even need a 2-year degree. So we've got to start getting young people and even older workers trained in this society, in this new job market. So it's the short term, it's the long term. Basically, we cannot open the economy the same way we closed it. We have got to invest in communities of color. You know this from where you sit, and that is what I'm going to try to do.
Okay. Just one last question with regards to housing, and that's the elephant in the room, which is NYCHA. I just watched yesterday, WPIX Channel 11 had a story about a senior a NYCHA housing complex, no heat and hot water. NYCHA tenants, they make the phone calls, dilapidated apartments, mold, broken elevators. And many of the candidates say the same thing. Oh, nothing we can do about it. We need the government to step up and give us federal funds. But these people live in the New York City Housing Authority. We get it. We get the government funds, but those seniors, heat and hot water in their building, our most vulnerable citizens, we cannot keep telling them, look at the federal government and tell them to send the city more money. So my question to you is, as mayor, what is your plan for NYCHA? How are you going to address these ongoing problems? Question number one. And question number two is, what is your position on the RAD program?
Look, as controller, I have investigated and audited NYCHA more than all controllers combined. So I know the tremendous waste. We've looked at the lack of repairs in stairwells, lighting, mildew, lead. I know the problems at NYCHA top to bottom. I think we have to move the management of NYCHA into City Hall. We have to go building by building. We have to make sure that we have money for boilers. We need new ways to pay for these issues. I've come up with ideas for that. And we have to remember that NYCHA is the foundation for a ticket to the middle class. That's why Mayor LaGuardia built NYCHA in the 1930s. And the divestment from Washington among Democratic administration and Republican administrations has been outrageous. And this is where talk is cheap. We need to have a plan, and the plan I will bring to this is the recognition that I know where the challenges are because I've already done the audits. And we cannot privatize NYCHA. That is not the goal. And the RAD program should not be about privatization. It should be about how we can make the necessary repairs and investments. And that is what stimulus money is for, $40 billion. We do need a federal response. There's things that we can do now. I have a plan to take Battery Park City, those buildings in Lower Manhattan, they throw up a lot of money for the city. I want to take $40 million over 10 years, bond that money as a way of making those repairs to the holes in the windows and the boilers and looking at the first new revenue stream in NYCHA. And that would be something I would do. In order to get that moved, you need the controller, governor, and the mayor to be aligned, right? And the governor and I actually supported this. The mayor didn't. Perhaps the new mayor and a new controller could join with the governor and get us that money. And I hope to do that.
So, Mr. Stringer, in your opening remarks, you said that we have an economic crisis, a health crisis, and a justice crisis. Now, I want to touch on the situation with public safety and law enforcement. We hear this push, defund the NYPD, the defund NYPD movement. But as a mother, as a mother raising a 12-year-old Black young man here in New York City, in the Bronx, my concern is more about the increase in crime, the rampant increase in crime, the major surge in gun violence, because whether it's in Brooklyn, you have a 1-year-old being shot out at the park. In the Bronx, you have a 4-year-old walking with her father getting shot in the head in broad daylight. The stories keep coming. So my question to you is this: as mayor, what is your plan to improve police community relations and also to address, the high increase in crime and the surge in gun violence in mostly Black and brown communities?
Look, I grew up in Washington Heights back in the 1970s when there were 2,000 murders a year. And my mom used to say to my brother and I, when you get on the A train, make sure you sit in the conductor car, because my mom was afraid for our safety. We've come a long way since then, but we have to do two things at the same time. Yes, we have to keep communities safe, but we also have to recognize that we have to keep our children away from the criminal justice system. We do not need to have police officers responding to mental health crises in communities. We do not have to have police officers in communities interacting with kids, because that never ends well. We need to have respected mentorship programs in our communities of color. We need to keep kids out of the school to prison pipeline. That's going to take new strategy and new funding to do that, but it's a worthwhile investment. And as mayor, I'm going to appoint a police commissioner who respects the community, who has my values, who will control the NYPD. I have a 40-page blueprint for change, both to keep our city safe and also do it through the lens of justice. And that's a program that I think is going to work. And I will share it with you and the community. And I'm the first candidate to actually put out a specific proposal of what I'm going to do. Part of this campaign is it's easy to say anything, right? I'll spend billions here and billions here, but that's not what being a mayor is all about. It's about making sure that on day one, in a job that's gotten a lot tougher, do you have the program, the specific plan, and then the ability to make the fundamental change we need to make going forward.
Yes, indeed. So, Comptroller Stringer, I want to end with one last topic for you. I watched the press conference, public advocate Jumaane Williams's press conference just a short time ago, where you and other candidates are citing, the COVID-19 pandemic and the health crisis as a reason to suspend waive petitioning. That's due to start in the next few weeks. So my question to you is, with the rollout, for example, of the vaccine, I think it was the New York Times that did an article on the fact that the majority of people who've received the COVID-19 were white, whereas the majority of people who were impacted and who died in the communities affected by the COVID-19 pandemic are Black and Brown communities. So my question to you is this: as mayor, how are you going to address these healthcare related disparities in our communities going forward?
The rollout of this vaccine has been incompetent. We didn't know that the virus was coming, and it took us a while to figure out the testing. And the surprise was the virus. But almost from the day COVID came to the city, we knew by reading any medical journal that a vaccine was in the works. And as months went on, we knew that there would be a vaccine by the end of the year. So the lack of planning in communities and communities of color, of course, got this result. 48% of white people getting the virus, getting the vaccination, 15% of Black people and 11% of Latino people. Maybe I'm reversing it, but basically the disparity was so real. That's management. That's lack of planning. That's a lack of understanding the challenges of education. And that just wouldn't happen under a Stringer administration. You gotta manage the crisis. And we knew this was coming. And part of being mayor is to watch out for everybody and to practice what you preach, because we've got to make sure that we have an equal system, and every community is different. And we know in communities of color, because of discrimination over many times, that there is suspicion about the vaccine. But that doesn't mean we don't go in every day and educate and get respected members of the community to go in and talk to the community, whether you're in the Dominican community, the Puerto Rican community, the African community. I mean, we've got to go in with a strategy for each community. And that was what I want to do as mayor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Stringer. Again, I just want to thank you for taking the time out today to engage our community and let us know what your COVID-19 plan is, the recovery plan to bring our great city back, and to talk more about your plans and your policies for other city government agencies. So this campaign, we are all watching very closely. It's exciting times. 2022 is something we can look forward to. New year, new mayor, new city council, new comptroller. Hopefully that comptroller is as good as you are.
Oh, by the way, what big shoes that new controller is going to have. Could you bet? Don't you feel sorry for whoever it is?
I feel sorry for them. And I hope they understand they need to keep those audits coming, and because we're going to need them to, like you said, fill some big shoes.
Thank you.
But, thank you so very much for joining us here today. And
well, thank you. This was a great interview, and you always get to the heart of the issues. And I look forward to working with you in the years ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
All right. Take care. Take care, everybody. Thank you.